Welcome to the Natural Parents Podcast, where we will cover all things faith, health, family, and wealth through a biblical perspective of putting things in life that matter most back into order. We're reminded of Matthew 6:33, where Jesus said, "But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things shall be added to you." Join us each week as we focus on what truly matters most in this life and passing those values on to the next generation. This is the Natural Parents Podcast with Ryan and Abbie Hukin.
I'm excited about this episode today because it is all about homesteading, and I just love it. I think that homesteading is awesome. I think that sometimes it's a misconception that homesteading has to look a certain way, or you have to have, certain things, and it costs a lot. And I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to, and that you can have it if it's something that you want to do. And just if you want to try it doesn't mean you have to commit to it for life. If you get 3 months down the road and you're like, I absolutely hate this, I don't know what the hype is, get rid of it all.
Absolutely. And homesteading is super cliche, trendy term right now to say, and I'm about it.
I know. I almost don't like to say homestead because people are like,
you're one of those.
I would say, well, what do I say? Like funny farm?
Yeah, all sorts of different things can it look like, but you see this trend of our generation going back to the way it used to be.
Yeah.
And most of that's, I think, built out of, one, the hustle and bustle of life and escaping the matrix. Not like the conspiracy aspects of that, so that would be a fun podcast episode to do too.
We'll wear tinfoil hats.
Yeah, absolutely. But seriously, like escaping that rat race mentality of life. And so there's certainly an attractiveness to it. I've seen that meme, I know you have too, where it's like, why are all these millennial generation like doing this simple life, like less clutter, like whatever, and it shows our parents and grandparents' homes, and it's like every corner and every crevice is just stuffed with stuff and knickknacks and trinkets and piles of stuff in the corner. I mean, it's just crazy.
I think it was like hey, millennial who used to listen to Soldier Boy or whatever, how are your chickens or something, and that was just, I don't even know if that was the right song.
It's a trend, but I think life cycles like that. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this before where, so our grandparents are like, you did what?
Yeah.
You processed your own meat birds?
Which means chickens that you eat.
Okay, you process your own chickens? Like, why on earth?
Yeah, they couldn't even fathom the idea.
Because they had to. Like, it was not a choice. That was a moment of life. And so then when they found out that you could go to the grocery store and probably cheaper, just like buy it off the shelf and in a can and just like heat it up, they were like, poof. So then our parents are a product of that generation. And God love them. For the most part, don't have a clue on how to do that. I'm speaking loosely. Generalities are generally true, though. So that happens, and then now there's us, and we're like, wait, there's a way of life of, maybe it's a little harder, but gosh, it's worth it. It's healthier. I get to raise my kids not glued to a device or stuck in a small confined area, or just all these different things that we get to do because we're choosing to do life on the homestead. There's this trendy element to it. But man, if you guys are like us and you want to get started on it, let's chat about it.
I mean, we're so far in, we're getting a home phone, y'all. Like, we're getting a home phone. So
I want the dial kind. Like this.
You got to crank it around. So first of all, there's a misconception that you have to have a lot of land to have a homestead, or you have to have the most beautiful barns, and you need all these perfect outbuildings, to hold the chickens and the goats and all of that. You don't. So right now, we have quite a bit of acreage, but we use 2 acres right now for what we have. We don't have a barn. We have old, ugly outbuildings. Like terrible. They're ugly. Buildings that we use for storing different things. Are they going to be there forever? No, because our home is closer to being done than not. And so eventually we do want a barn, but it's not going to be what you may have pictured in your head. It's just going to be functional, and that is the most important thing that I have found. And so like you can make outbuildings and anything that you need out of old lumber that you find and metal. Like you can get used tin metal whatever that's called.
Like the galvanized.
Yeah.
You can find that stuff
From anywhere.
on the marketplace.
And perfume on a pig, paint that bad boy and it's going to look good. Don't get on Pinterest and look up ideas, but it's going to look good.
Speaking of pigs, I made a pig hut. Well, I made first we call it a little pig glue.
Yeah.
It like moves around. Little pig glue is just fun to say. Out of scrap decking material that your dad tore down a deck and was like, hey, this is good wood. Do you want some of it? And I was like, I'll take all of it, and tossed it in one of the lean-tos on the farm and just start pulling stuff out of there and made them a little pig hut. And that served them for a little while. And then more recently, there's just scrap sheathing for the siding and roofing on our house and some pallets. I made them a big, longer lean-to type of thing for the pigs. Like you can
make it out of anything. And I'm not saying it has to look trashy. It can look good.
It's better. It works better if it looks trashy.
Yeah, like the trashier it is, the better it really works. But no, it's just to be encouraging because I know it's easy to see things on social media, on Pinterest that look really, really good. And you're like, how am I going to ever afford like a second house payment to build a barn? And I'm just here to say you don't have to. It can function probably better if it's not as pretty. So, chickens is like the gateway drug to homesteading, we've heard, and it is very true. We started out with laying hens, and it just kind of went wild from there. So there are dual purpose birds that you can get, laying hens, and they can double as meat birds. We have not done this yet. It is an idea that we really, really like. However, we have had chicken from a local farm where they do that, and those chickens more free range a lot, and we found that the meat was tougher. And truly, I was like, if this is chicken, I don't want to eat chicken. And so it wasn't until we raised our own meat birds or chicken that's just for meat, which are more the breed of like Cornish cross. And
specifically for that.
Yeah, they're specifically for that. So as gruesome as it is, this just helps me be able to process them, is that if you don't process them for meat anywhere beyond like 9 or 10 weeks, their legs will break, they won't be able to move because they'll be so top heavy so it's like you have to. So that helps me.
They have a purpose, and that's something I think is important. It's an important part of why we're doing this, is that I think we're too removed from where our food comes from. Like we joked about how awesome it was when our grandparents' generation found out that they could, as adults, just like buy stuff at the grocery store to provide for their family. And then that's how our parents were raised. Like there's a part of that is convenient, don't get me wrong, but part of this whole homesteading thing for us was getting back to, albeit a more complicated way of gaining nutrition. There's something about when we were the ones that raised it, when we're the ones that process it, when we're the ones that go through that actual process of that, it's like, wait, we're getting close to our food here. Like, we know where it came from, yes, but two, it's like there's something on a metaphysical level that has to do with our whole well-being that I think actually matters. And so a point of note, she mentioned like the dual purpose birds, like in the free range, like they'll be like free range in the traditional sense of the matter because they can lay eggs and wander around your farm, and we do Easter egg hunts all the time, stuff like that. But like when we did the Cornish crossbirds, we built them a chicken tractor because they are everything on the planet that's not a chicken. Even some chickens want to eat chicken. Like it's like the gateway drug of homesteading, but it's like the delicacy of the animal kingdom. Like everything wants to eat your chickens.
Very
so
true.
That is something you have to navigate, whether you're getting any kinds of birds. But we built like a chicken tractor to protect our Cornish cross birds. And so they get to free range, they're on grass, and it gets moved a couple of times a day. And I recommend that for sure. But we even on all that, right? Like we just right at 70 birds recently, plus 4 pigs, 30 some odd laying chickens, dogs, cats, rabbits, all this kind of stuff. Guys, we're doing it on less than 2 acres. You have a big garden. Like you can, just want to go back to that point, you can do a lot with a very, very little. We have more land because we have more, we want to have cows and do that kind of side of things, but you can do so much with so little. Yeah,
you really can. And if you guys have any questions on specifics of like processing your own birds and things like that, you can hop on our Facebook group, The Natural Parents, and ask in there because we have had a lot of questions about that, and it's a lot to cover and go into the nitty gritty. So any specific questions that you have, feel free to hop on there and ask those. But we also, I will say, our grandparents are always like, you do what? Like, you pluck those chickens and everything? No, I'm like, Grandma, there's a chicken plucker 5000, just spins them around, takes off all their feathers. My dad was actually building our house the day that we were processing the meat birds, and he came over and was helping us, and he had that job. He had the scalder and then the chicken plucker, and it was good. And our kids are involved. It's not gruesome. We pray over the birds and we thank them, and it may seem silly to some, but we just make sure that we are appreciative of the purpose that they have. So the next thing is a garden. So learning what you want in a garden. And as people who are mostly animal-based eaters, this is very simple because we don't do most vegetables. Don't tell my mom. But so you just have to think of your goals with a garden. Like, do you want just summer yummies? Do you want to can for the winter? Like, what is your goal with that? And what do you find that your family eats the most of?
Cucumbers,
aka pickles.
Pickles, cucumbers. That's a big staple of a vegetable, but it's actually a fruit. That's when she says we don't eat a lot of vegetables, is because what you might traditionally think of as even a vegetable, those are the ones that we eat, but we eat them because they're more fruit based.
Yeah. So we eat like cucumbers, pickles, all the berries. I do have peppers, like jalapenos, stuff like that. Potatoes, I really want to make salsa. Potatoes, onions, tomatoes. Yeah, and then herbs. I love lavender in the garden too. And I think that a garden, I don't know why, I feel like when you gift something that you've either homemade or it's from your garden, like all of your efforts in that, and like a cute little wooden box that he will make me, I think there's nothing sweeter than a gift like that for some reason. So
something from the homestead.
Yeah, like fresh flowers in it. I think it's the best thing ever.
So just think about when it comes to your garden, we started, before we ever even owned our land, we started in raised beds.
Yeah.
Raised beds are hard because you have to water constantly because there's nothing to lock the moisture in. Again, we could do a whole podcast on gardening for sure. But the best thing, if you're just looking for a nugget to find out there and you really want to get into the gardening thing, is Back to Eden gardening. It's a really no-till, almost no water style garden where you lay down a certain sequence of actually it's newspaper and it's compost and good topsoil, and then on top of that you put mulch, and that mulch locks moisture in. We have friends who showed us their garden last year during a drought.
Huge drought.
An inch and a half down, and it was just this black, rich, dark, moist soil.
She's like, I haven't watered in 3 weeks. I'm like, I'm out there twice a day watering, and it's still not enough. So.
And that was in raised beds that were on the ground still.
Yes.
So we moved from like raised beds to then we had raised like sectioned off beds with wood, and then now we're like mostly in the ground with mulch on top. And that's working out pretty well so far this year. So.
Yeah, and every year that you do it, this friend, they're the Creckies, they're on YouTube. You should check them out. They're awesome. They, she says, she's like, it gets better every year because when you're laying that mulch and the newspaper and all of that, you're just creating richer soil because it breaks down as compost, and it just gets better and better every year. So if you start out, don't get discouraged. I definitely was, even at the beginning of this garden season when I started to expand in my garden, I was like, oh my gosh, like it feels like the weeds are coming up, and there's ways to navigate that with planting your plants, putting down cardboard, putting mulch over it to help just keep things growing where you want them and not where you don't.
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to like setting up your homestead, you start to get some animals, things. Something we found was making feeding or caretaking as efficient as possible. Where can we position things? What kind of containers can we get food for? Again, we don't have a formal barn yet. We have an old leaning garage that still keeps stuff dry, so we use the heck out of that. Some lean-tos, some different stuff like that, where we can just keep water off stuff. The front porch on the old farmhouse holds our bulk pallets of feed whenever we need them to, but that's again still proximity to the main paddocks that we've got like our pigs in and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, and I mean we have those barrels that we got used on Marketplace for like a few bucks. And so I think that it's just making things work for you and be efficient. But again, nothing has to be brand new. And with that, like thinking of when you're on your homestead, what meat do you consume the most? So like what would be more beneficial to raise? For us, the next most logical step was pig and pork. And eventually we do want to do beef cattle. We just have to replace all the fencing on our land first before we do that and rotationally graze them. But we have kune pigs. Some will actually tell us that they're not full-blooded kune because their noses are a little bit longer.
Idaho pasture pigs.
Yeah,
It's the
so they're
American
probably,
version of a kune.
yes, they're more that, but they don't stink. And that is my biggest thing. They don't stink like traditional pigs. They actually smell like almost, if you remember, honeycomb cereal or maple syrup. Like,
It's pretty wild.
it's wild. Like, you wouldn't believe me till you came and took a sniff close to them, but they don't smell like pigs. They're really cute. And actually, right now, if you follow us on social media, you will see that we have the cutest little girl named Penny. She is our, I guess, 2.5-week-old
Orphaned
little kune pig. Her mom wasn't supposed to, we didn't think she could even have babies yet. Surprise, she can. So Penny is one of 4. The other 3 did not make it, and so we have been bottle feeding her and loving her to death, and I swear that's why she's alive now to tell the story.
So sometimes on your homestead, your animals, for a purpose, become pets. And so Penny's going to be a pet pig.
Yeah, I don't think I could
she
ever
actually hangs out
process
with
her.
the dogs right now more than anything. We try to put her into the pig pen, and somehow she gets out. So she's going to be our pet pig, but the other ones will continue to live out their purpose.
And I will say, our kids really humble us on this. But so before we ever even moved to our farm, our stray cat that found us 2 years ago ended up having babies. And when she had them, me and the kids were all with her. They were stillborn. It was devastating. We were heartbroken. We were like, okay, well, she can try again. She did just have, probably 2.5 months ago, more kittens. She had 4 super healthy, adorable kittens. And so she then achieved her, healthy babies in birth. But we also have bunnies who, when they first had their bunnies, they were all dead too. And they then since have had a healthy litter, I think is what a bunny is called. And so now that our pigs had their first pigs and all but one passed away, hopefully next time, our kids are just like, why is every birth, why do they all die the first time? And I don't know. A lot of times that can happen with first-time moms and caring for them. And I mean, in our cat story, they were just stillborn. But if your story looks anything like that, don't be discouraged. Don't beat yourself up too much. It's definitely hard, especially on the heart and your kids' hearts. But I just want to say, don't be discouraged. And, you're not negligent. You're just...
Yeah, it's hard because unfortunate reality of life, even as humans, is that death is a part of life. And that's something on the homestead that our kids, I don't know, some will say one thing or another, but it's something they're going to have a familiarity with. I mean, I know growing up, we raised cows, and one year, I remember my parents being so discouraged because it was March, but it was the worst March ever, and we had feet of snow at one point in time, and it was just crazy. It was that's when calves like to calve, or cows like to calve, is in the worst of conditions, ice, freezing rain, snow, all this stuff, and it's you lose at times, but it's our hearts do break because we do feel responsible to some element of that. It's gosh, we're their primary caregivers and all this kind of stuff, and we put that much intentionality in it, and that makes it hard too. But again, I think there's such an element of it. If you guys are considering a homestead in this aspect, don't let that be something that discourages you, because I think there's more growth, more learning, more opportunity for our kids, for our family, for us to be better, more rounded individuals because of the hardships that comes with raising your own food.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's not like we're making them, cold and heartless. And in fact, they're more in touch with it, but they also can learn how to process that, because so oftentimes I think that we just try to skip right over that and protect them from that. And so learning through that with them, I think, is really good. And so also considering how you want to feed your animals, I think that's been a really big one for us, is that whatever we consume, we wanted to be sure that it was quality, because you are what your food eats. And so, sorry, I took it from you.
Yeah, that's all right. That's good.
So just making sure that what they're eating is up to your standards. For us, we don't do corn, soy, grain. They just eat, pretty much rocks.
That's true. Something, again, not to go too far down this from a health standpoint, but what Abbie said, meat will have a improper omega ratio. Omega-3s are the good omega fats to 6s are the less optimal, less desirable one. In America, a big problem with our diet and with the meat and the consumption. When people tell you that eating meat is bad for you, it's because oftentimes in America we're eating high ratios of omega-6s to omega-3s. If you can get that ratio as close to like 1-to-1, 2-to-1 as possible, then you're eating meat the way it was supposed to and designed to be eaten. So she talked about a goal of ours. Big goal is grass-fed, grass-finished beef cows. But our chicken eats no soy, no corn, anything like that, because corn especially is excessively high in like linoleic acid and omega-6s and things like that, where the ratio becomes significantly imbalanced. So yes, what we feed our food is super important because it winds up in us.
Yeah.
So paying attention to that. Don't just buy the cheapest food. Buy the best food you possibly can at the best possible price, which for us, we buy in bulk, like 2,000 pound totes, which again, if you didn't know this, is something you can do. Take a look into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So from there, our future wish list is, I definitely want a milk cow. There's so many possibilities that you can do with that. But just obviously the raw A2 milk, cheeses. I mean, you can make your own homemade ice cream and cottage cheese and butter. Butter is a huge one. We go through a lot of butter because that's what we primarily cook with. And so I'm just excited for that.
Yeah, that would be a huge thing. Like if the garden is becoming, from the homestead standpoint, going to make us more sufficient and less dependent on the grocery store. We're really excited about that. This is the first year we're going to have potatoes. We're going to have tons of potatoes.
Hope so.
White sweet potatoes, onions, things like that. That's a big part of the produce that we have to buy. Fruit, we did plant fruit trees. Forgot to mention
yes,
that.
We did.
So we recently planted fruit trees. They take a little time to actually start to bear fruit, but we got to get started on those. So if that's something that you desire, so worth noting in your homestead is getting your fruit trees in the ground as soon as you possibly can, because they will take a little time to start to bear that. And then raising our own pork already, but then eventually beef. And lastly will be the milk. That's like 99% of our diet. So occasional flour and things like that that we buy in bulk and stuff. But aside from that, that's our goal with Homestead is one, raising our family this way, but two, becoming less dependent on the grocery store.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're considering a homestead, just make a list of what that would look like in a perfect world for you, and then just start there. And if you don't like it, you can always sell them off.
From the bottom of our hearts, we want to thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with someone you know and leave a review. By doing so, we're able to grow this community of amazing people just like you and raise a generation of children that know God and do His will on earth. We'll see you next time.